Welcome to Fashion And with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator. Just a reminder that you can keep up to date with everything Fashion And by following @Fashion And with Scott Schiavone on Instagram and by hitting that subscribe button. In this special extended episode, we'll be looking at a designer who ruled the 1970s and propelled American fashion onto an international stage. This is Fashion and Halston. You're only as good as the people you dress. Roy Halston Frowick, known simply as Halston, shot to fame in 1961 when Jackie Kennedy wore one of his hats to her husband John F. Kennedy's presidential inauguration. In the late 1960s, as hats were falling out of fashion, Halston expanded his creative output to include made-to-order and ready-to-wear, and by the 1970s, dressed the decade's most stylish and influential women. Halston defined iconic American style and was hailed as the premier fashion designer in America. He reinvented the jumpsuit, the shirtdress and the classic caftan using materials such as jersey, cashmere and ultra suede, alongside a deceptively simple colour palette to create minimalist silhouettes devoid of superfluous trimmings. His designs epitomise the hedonistic glamour and excess of the 1970s disco era. Halston was a regular at Studio 54 and dressed a large percentage of the club's celebrity female clientele, including Bianca Jagger, Liza Minnelli and his famed entourage, the Halstonettes, which included Pat Cleveland, Karen Bjornsson and Alva Chin. No other designer defined the elegance and luxury of 1970s fashion. Halston pioneered the idea of the designer as stylist and promoted a unified aesthetic vision. He created a world for you to live in, from caftans to couches. America's first fashion superstar, a groundbreaking craftsman, a pioneering businessman and a genius of promotion, as well as a compellingly glamorous man with handsome movie star looks. In this episode, we will be exploring the life and work of Halston through 6 themes: becoming Halston, the Halston aesthetic, Halston's people, Halston's world, the fall from Olympus, and Halston's legacy. Halston's life reads like a great American tragedy. Born in the Midwest to a modest middle-class family, he grew up to become the country's best-known fashion designer. A child of the Depression, Roy Halston Frowick was born on the 23rd of April 1932 in Des Moines, Iowa. Fair with green eyes, he was the second of 4 children. He was named Roy after his father's brother and Halston after his maternal grandfather. His first taste of the limelight came at the tender age of 2 when he was voted Healthiest City Boy at the Iowa State Fair. From an early age, Roy showed a keen interest in making accessories and clothing. His mother was his first muse, and he would create one-of-a-kind hats for her, which she would wear to church on Sundays. Roy also loved dressing his siblings in cast-off clothes, which he would accessorise with items made from chicken feathers and other items from around the house. At high school, Roy was the best dressed person and was the go-to for style advice for his friends. Every year, he would decide the look that him and his friendship group would wear for the school season. In 1952, after a spring semester at Indiana University, Roy dropped out and decided to enroll in an evening class in fashion illustration at the Chicago Art Institute. He also secured a job designing windows at Chicago's most prestigious department store, Carson Pirie Scott & Co. He didn't last long at art school, as his teachers said he knew as much as they did. His work as a window dresser, however, brought him in contact with Chicago's elite society, who became his first customers when he started designing hats. In the 1950s and 60s, hats were an integral part of a lady's wardrobe, and to go out in public without one was unthinkable. Rebranding and going by the name of Fro, Roy set up his own business selling hats from the corner of society and Hollywood A-lister hairstylist Andre Basil Hoffner's salon in the Ambassador Hotel. Hats were very big business in those days, especially in a windy city like Chicago. When a notable client came in for an appointment, Hofner would ensure Fro was there to meet them and introduce them to his hat designs. His millinery creations soon attracted the attention of journalists and publicists. He told the press that Roy Halston Frowick didn't fit on a label, so he shortened it to his middle name, Halston, a simple, streamlined and slightly aristocratic sounding moniker, the perfect fit for this rising star. Success followed and he soon opened his own hat shop at 952 North Michigan Avenue. Peg Zwecker, then fashion editor of the Chicago Daily News, wrote that Halston was very creative and talented. This young designer has a flair for making just the right hat to suit the wearer. Zwecker sent a selection of Halston's hats and sketches to famed milliner Lily Dashe in New York, who sent a message back saying, "Send me that boy immediately." In 1957, Halston left Chicago and moved to New York to start work with Lily Dashe. He quickly became co-designer and his first collection was a hit with the clients and the press. He didn't stay long though. Halston was not allowed to put his own name to his designs and he felt like he didn't get the recognition he deserved. There are no problems, only opportunities. Halston was soon headhunted by Bergdorf Goodman's and was offered the position of head milliner. The millinery salon at Bergdorf Goodman's was the epicentre of money and style, and Halston gained access not only to New York's but to the world's most stylish women. For a young designer with ambition, Bergdorf's was the place to be. Halston was not only granted his own label, Halston at Bergdorf's, but was also given a budget that allowed him to satisfy his taste for luxury. By 1959, Women's Wear Daily was heralding Halston as New York's top milliner. In 1961, Halston designed the hat Jackie Kennedy wore to the presidential inauguration of her husband John F. Kennedy. He was her favourite milliner on the campaign trail and during the White House years. Diana Vreeland, then editor of Harper's Bazaar, wrote a letter to Halston. "The cloches for Mrs. Kennedy are marvellous. Between her beauty and your talent, you have indeed made a young woman in a hat look perfection." His favourite materials as a milliner were feathers and mink, which he would mould and sculpt into hair-concealing turbans and cloches. He whipped organdy into chef's hats and puff pastry shapes and designed rhinestone-studded fishnet masks. In 1962, Halston won his first Coty American Fashion Critics Special Award for innovation in millinery, the highest accolade an American designer could wish for. Halston would eventually go on to win 4 Coty Awards, 2 for millinery and 2 for fashion. By 1966, Halston knew that hats and haute couture were becoming less and less fashionable, as the great cultural shifts of the 1960s moved fashion towards the ready-to-wear market. As early as 1964, Halston told Women's Wear Daily, "If I were to design clothes, they'd have to be snappy, all function and ease. Let's face it, dresses are not going to have feathers and fuss in the future. We'll go on simplifying, everything uncluttered." Financed by Bergdorf's, Halston presented his first fashion collection in June 1966. Intended to bridge the gap between couture and ready-to-wear, the collection featured only 18 pieces. The runway show was fresh and novel, music played and the models walked casually down the runway as though they were out for a stroll down Fifth Avenue. Halston saw that the future of fashion was changing. More women were going out to work and they demanded comfort and ease in their clothes. He wanted to provide them with simple but luxurious clothing that met their needs while satisfying their desire for luxury and glamour. His first collections received mediocre reviews and modest sales. Soon after, Halston resigned from Bergdorf's and sought financial backing to set up his own fashion house. With the financial backing of his Bergdorf client, Texan socialite Estelle Marsh Watlington, Halston was able to establish Halston Limited in April 1968. Simply the premier fashion designer of all America. The shift from milliner to couturier was testament to Halston's great talent and evolution as a designer. By the time Halston opened his boutique in 1968, American women wanted to wear clothes that were attractive, well-made and comfortable. Halston showed his first solo ready-to-wear collection under the Halston Limited label in October 1968. The collection was a highly tactile, wearable range of clothing that included trousers, simple shirts and silk chiffon and jersey, ultralight chiffon and velvet dresses, and lots of knitwear. Halston transformed the informality and comfort of sportswear into clothing suitable for all occasions. He turned fashion on its ear by blending simple, pared-down silhouettes with the most luxurious fabrics. He epitomised contemporary luxury and made clothes that were devoid of any superfluous decoration. Constructed from simple lines, his garments had as little seams and fastenings as possible. Halston's clothes were comfortable and easy to wear, perfect for the emerging international jet set, and came to symbolise more than any other designer the glamour and luxury of the 1970s. Halston was a modernist, an innovator, and made clothes that were true to his signature classic but relaxed style. Retro sweater sets in luxurious cashmere, fluid chiffon caftans in royal colours, elegant pajamas, chic day dresses in the much sought after ultra suede fabric, and halter evening dresses in sexy slinky jersey. Halston's garments, ranging from pajamas to pantsuits, were constructed with simple lines and a minimalist aesthetic. He eliminated inner structures and linings to further enhance the clean lines of his designs. Vogue editor-in-chief Grace Mirabella told Newsweek in 1972, "From the start as a designer, the clothes coming out of Halston's couldn't be found anywhere else. They were for attractive and important women, the busy women to whom life means something. Here were the clothes you could do it all in. They were modern clothes for modern women." By the mid-1970s, Halston's brand of minimalism reigned supreme. He introduced his famous sarong dress, a slim tube of fabric that wrapped around the body and gained shape only when worn. He began to ornament some of his simple designs with sequins and bugle beads. His two-seamed jumpsuits, sweaters and dresses were adorned with monochromatic sequins that matched the base fabric. The growing complexity of his work was most evident in the evening garments constructed with asymmetrical necklines and swirling bias-cut seams. By the late 1970s, he engineered blouses with large and stiffly ruffles that resembled orchids and paired them with narrow skirts and trousers. Halston was the master of American fashion who bridged the gap between the elevated glamour of haute couture and the fast-paced modern world of ready-to-wear. The most famous thing Halston ever did, the piece that everyone owned. Introduced in the fall of 1972, Halston's reinvention of the most basic item, a man's shirt, into a sexy, sporty dress for a new generation of women was one of the reasons he was such a directional force in fashion in the 1970s. Made from a machine-washable fabric known as ultra suede, Halston's signature shirtwaist dress became an irreplaceable staple in women's wardrobes due to its practicality and understated sex appeal. Halston first saw ultra suede in 1971 in Paris on Issey Miyake, who was wearing one of his own designs made from the fabric. He initially thought the material to be waterproof and so designed a trench coat, but after it absorbed water instead of repelling it, he rethought the design and the shirt dress was born. The dress was suited to the slim body that had become the new beauty standard for women in the 1970s. It was great for accentuating a small waist with its wide belt that could be worn any which way the wearer wanted. For its debut season in the fall of 1972, Bergdorf sold 700 dresses costing $180 each, which in today's money is about $1,150. 4 years later, more than 40,000 were sold at double that price.
Halston, Gucci, Fiorucci.
Although Halston was not the only designer who pioneered the caftan in fashion, as an advocate for minimalism, he rejected the use of heavy ornamentation and decorative elements found in the caftans of designers such as Thea Porter. At his most reductive, Halston created caftans from a single length of fabric, cutting a hole for the head and leaving slits for the arms at the side seams. Halston's caftans closely aligned with the work of Parisian-based couturiers Madame Grès and Madeleine Vionnet, whose caftans were completely original, couture-constructed iterations of the humble garment. Halston, like Madame Grès, created his billowing caftans by blending a length of fabric cut on the straight grain with draping on the bias. The soft draping qualities of Halston's designs emulated those of Madeleine Vionnet, who cut garments skillfully to glide over the female body, highlighting its shape without clinging too tightly to the body. Halston developed the techniques further by folding and assembling his caftans in more complex patterns. Sketches in the collection at the museum at FIT attest to this innovation in cut and design. Halston made caftans in glittering gold lame and tie-dyed silk chiffon. After Babe Paley wore a tie-dye caftan to a museum opening in 1971, Halston received orders from dozens of ladies who wanted one of their own. The caftan was popular because it was a dress that a woman of any size could look good in. Halston's saleswoman and model Pat Ast wore his caftans and looked and felt amazing. He transformed me from a £200 actress into a runway model. The halter neck was a style that emerged during the 1920s and 30s. Numerous famous fashion designers from Paris to Hollywood designed versions of evening gowns with halter necks. There was, during the 1970s, a revival of 1930s and 40s styles. Yves Saint Laurent, for example, dedicated an entire collection to the 1940s for his haute couture spring 1971 collection. Halston, saying he liked the feeling of a nude back for day and night, designed halter necks for day and evening wear that were undeniably sexy. Halston's halter neck dresses, inspired by styles of the 1930s and 40s, were perfectly designed to suit his modern and chic vision without ever looking old-fashioned. He created halter necks inspired by 1930s activewear, specifically swimwear. His 1972 floor-length dress, aptly called the swimsuit dress, featured a deep scoop neckline, narrow straps and evocative moon-shaped cutouts on either side of the torso, extending from the ribcage to the hip line. While similar exposure of the skin did not exist in 1930s swimwear, Halston expanded the amount of skin on view and took the idea from the beach to the dance floor. Halston's pajamas moved easily from the theatre to pillow-laden home environments. It was around 1973 that Halston made slinky silk pajamas a trademark of the Halston style. Halston designed a clean and polished but comfortable and understated option for women who did not want to wear trendy or opulent fashions. Everyone doesn't want to dress up. When someone says, "Come over to my house but don't get dressed up," it isn't always a matter of an old pair of pants or jeans. Balancing beauty, modernity and elegance, Halston modernised and formalised the 1930s pyjama ensemble that could be worn in either a casual, sporty environment or at home. Halston's pyjama tops had a set-in collar, deep V-neck, long sleeves, a curved hem that covered the hips and a slightly narrow waist. His pyjama trousers were svelte but not tight, as Halston cut them, especially those made of silk, satin or crepe, on the bias. This technique ensured a slim fit, but with a degree of elasticity. Halston's knitwear was just as popular as his dresses and pyjamas. His knitwear consisted of fitted cardigans and narrow skirts that were mostly made of cashmere. Taking inspiration from the clean lines and minimalism of Man Boccar, the first American to open a couture house in Paris, and his elegant, simple cashmere sweater sets dating from the 1940s, Halston transformed the proportions by narrowing and lengthening knitted pieces so they became the simplest and most elegant of evening wear with hems that skimmed the floor. Halston also transformed knitwear into elegant evening coats and suit jackets. He reworked his sweater sets continuously over many collections and would work on specific knits for years in order to get it to hang properly on the body. The elegant simplicity of Halston's cashmere knitwear meant that his daytime separates could be mixed and matched to form evening ensembles with ease and versatility. By updating and refreshing silhouettes and blurring the lines between activewear, daywear and evening wear, Halston appropriated the ease and elegance of the 1930s and 40s and redesigned it for the fast-paced lives of women in the 1970s. Launched in 1975, the Halston fragrance was one of his most famous creations and, like everything else he touched, was an unmitigated success. Created by Bernard Champ, the original Halston was a floral chypre, meaning that its notes were arranged around oak moss and patchouli. At its base, it smelled of hedonism and excess. It was seductive, smooth and utterly unique, as well as having an unexpected masculine twist. Elsa Peretti's groundbreaking bottle was originally inspired by a bud vase pendant she found in a flea market. Elsa's bottle, which Halston intended to be a collector's item, was difficult to manufacture, required endless tinkering to ensure the stopper was leak-proof, and couldn't be filled using standard machinery. Halston was so enamoured by the design that he fought tooth and nail, and even paid $50,000 of his own money to produce it, overriding Max Factor's executives overseeing the perfume's production. The bottle was also revolutionary in the fact that it featured no branding, simply a ribbon bearing the designer's name. The absence of his name and the unusual shape of the bottle, along with its unique scent, only made the allure of Halston irresistible. Halston was one of the best-selling luxury fragrances for more than a decade. Halston wasn't the first designer to license his name. However, at his peak, he had acquired more than 30 licenses. The sheer range of products that Halston designed was extraordinary. Like many designers, he created patterns for McCall's. He created a menswear collection. He designed accessories, including gloves in cashmere and ultra suede. He designed hosiery, scarves, handbags, shoes, glasses, underwear, rugs, towels, and even luggage. As well as designing clothes for a plethora of celebrity clientele, he also believed in designing good quality clothing for the masses. He designed the uniforms for the American Girl Scouts, Braniff International Airways flight attendants, the American Olympic Games team, and his affordable clothing line for Penney. Throughout Halston's glittering career, he was surrounded by close friends, clients, artists, and hanger-oners. No other client was successfully transformed by Halston as Liza Minnelli. Halston transformed her from a doe-eyed ingenue into a superstar vamp. He designed a wardrobe of stunning outfits for Liza that minimised her flaws and highlighted her assets. She regularly wore Halston's designs for her high-profile appearances, including the bright yellow dress and sweater she wore when she picked up an Oscar for Best Actress in Cabaret in 1973. We got along instantly and he became my fashion mate. I did what he said, he really took care of me. The pair were inseparable during the 1970s and 80s. Liza was a frequent guest at Halston's infamous house parties at his Upper East Side townhouse, and they attended many events together, travelled internationally, and partied at Studio 54. Halston and Liza's friendship was probably the most important relationship Halston ever had. Halston continued to design for Liza even after he was ousted from his own design company and right up until his death.
But it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that.
Jewellery designer Elsa Peretti had arrived from Italy in 1968 to be a model and artist, and very soon became close friends with Halston. Halston often collaborated with Elsa, who created stunning and elegant jewellery and adornments that enhanced his clothes. Elsa designed the iconic bottle for his Halston fragrance. She had to agree to a one-time design fee of $25,000 for the bottle, but instead of money, she requested a sable coat made by Halston licensee Ben Kahn. Their friendship broke down, however, after a miniature version of the bottle Elsa had designed was given away as a free gift with purchase. Peretti felt that the agreement had been broken, and after a heated argument with Halston, threw her sable coat into the fire. After that, their friendship was never the same.
Have some fun.
Victor Hugo, the Venezuelan sex worker Halston met in 1972, was his on-again, off-again lover for over a decade, and the artist responsible for the extravagantly shocking window displays at Halston's 68th Street boutique. His window displays were witty and wildly creative and would shock passers-by with controversial designs which included abortion clinics and sadomasochistic romps. The negative press garnered by his window displays made Halston's designs even more desirable, and Victor used Halston's fame to further his own agenda. Hugo saw his window displays as real art within a retail environment. I put windows on the map as a pop artist. I look at it as art. The windows became my paintings, my occupation. Many still blame Victor Hugo and his negative influence on the designer as contributing greatly to Halston's downfall. The Venezuelan callboy was his downfall. He was a grifter who clung on like a parasite, like a barnacle on a ship. Halston was impressed with all-girl singing groups like the Supremes. He wanted to create his own group of swirling, entertaining, well-dressed young ladies, so he called his models the Halstonettes. That way, we too could be in harmony. It felt divine moving in our chiffon, cashmere and bugle-beaded evening dresses to the smooth jazz sounds which he so loved. It's also been claimed that fashion editor Andre Leon Talley coined the term Halstonettes in Interview magazine. Absolutely integral to Halston were his entourage of models, the Halstonettes. The Halstonettes were striking not only for their tall, lean bodies and beautiful faces, but also for their ethnic diversity. The models he chose were central to communicating the Halston look and lifestyle, and the Halstonettes appeared on the runway season after season. They travelled with the designer en masse to social gatherings and press outings, from nights at Studio 54 to the Great Wall of China. Although the lineup changed, there were a few stalwarts such as Elsa Peretti, Karen Bjornsson, Pat Cleveland, Chris Royer, Nancy North and Alva Chin. The models not only reflected the designer's style, they also mirrored his self-image: young, beautiful, glamorous, haughty, vibrant and photogenic. An unlikely friendship, Halston and Andy Warhol were polar opposites. Halston was charismatic, outgoing and flamboyant, while Warhol was softly spoken, reserved and observant. However, both Halston and Warhol understood each other. They were both gay men who had grown up in conservative areas. They shared an artistic vision that made a permanent imprint on art and fashion, and they both shared a wild zest for life. Halston would display Warhol's pop art prints in his 63rd Street Manhattan townhouse, while Warhol would design Halston's advertising campaigns and use Halston as a subject in many of his stark Polaroids and screen prints. They would holiday together at Warhol's Montauk retreat and co-hosted legendary parties at Studio 54. When asked for tips on how to get into the legendary nightclub, Warhol replied, "Always go with Halston or in Halston." English-born American couturier Charles James was a major influence on Halston. They met in 1958, not long after Halston moved to New York. In 1968, Halston told Women's Wear Daily, "Charles James played a very important part in my life. I met him in Chicago and he introduced me to a high element in fashion. I am a great admirer of his." For his 1970 collection, Halston hired James as a fashion consultant engineer to help with the cut, construction and look of his clothes. Halston explained, "He helped shape the collection, like Balenciaga helped Givenchy. The complicated and overwrought collection received poor reviews and the two designers fell out." The notoriously temperamental James attacked Halston for years. In 1975, he wrote an article for Metropolis magazine in which he accused the young designer of plagiarism for not including his name on the labels. Despite the drama, Halston gained insight into the meticulous mechanics of Charles James's genius, and the influence of the designer on Halston's work is evident in the swirling seams and unorthodox manipulations of fabric Halston would later include in his most innovative designs. Halston lived his aesthetic every day, from the house he lived in to the clothes he designed and the places he visited. He was his brand. A first for an American designer, Halston's first atelier and studio was uptown in a seedy third-floor space on 68th Street near Madison Avenue. From the start, Halston wanted his showroom to be different from anything else on 7th Avenue. With the help of interior designer Angelo Dongia, Halston created a tropical environment for his clients to enjoy, complete with batik-covered walls, the smell of Rigaud candles, and his favourite flowers, orchids. Within this unconventional setting, Halston displayed his clean line garments with their streamlined silhouettes and luxurious fabrics. He understood that fashion and the environment were intertwined, and his salon manifested his relaxed but indulgent style. Being uptown, Halston was so close to his clients that they could pop by his studio for some impromptu socialising. His door was always open to his exclusive clientele. The business grew quickly, and Halston took over more and more floors of the building until eventually Halston Limited occupied all 5 floors, including the ground floor where Halston opened his first boutique in 1972 at 813 Madison Avenue, the very first of its kind for an American designer. Halston Limited was acquired by Norton Simon in early November 1973. Though he'd already been approached by Revlon and Chanel, Halston felt comfortable with Norton Simon chairman David Mahoney. At the time of the deal, Halston personally owned Halston Limited, which produced ready-to-wear and custom-made clothes. The deal with Norton Simon changed Halston's business significantly. For one thing, it gave him a huge injection of cash. They paid $16 million for the ready-to-wear line Couture line and Halston name, forming a new company called Halston Enterprises. Although they technically owned the right to his name, his agreement with Norton Simon guaranteed some control of design. Norton Simon made Halston president of the new company and an instant millionaire. The deal was the envy of every designer on 7th Avenue. In 1973, along with Bill Blass, Anne Klein, Stephen Burrows and Oscar de la Renta, Halston accepted the invitation to take part in a fashion show at the Palace of Versailles. The guest list included around 700 celebrities, socialites and royalty, such as Andy Warhol, Elizabeth Taylor, Jacqueline de Riebe and Princess Grace of Monaco. Pitted against 5 kings of French haute couture, Yves Saint Laurent, Pierre Cardin, Hubert de Givenchy, Christian Dior and Emmanuel Ungaro, the American section of the show was opened by Liza Minnelli. When it was time for Halston's segment, set to the music from Visconti's The Damned, the first models out on stage were Elsa Peretti and Chris Royer. We were wearing black and white silk jersey dresses, Elsa holding an enlarged silver compact and I an elongated cigarette holder. Alva Chin was on a pedestal in a red chiffon dress over one shoulder and she revealed her bust. Marissa Berenson came out centre stage with a halter sequin dress and an elaborate sequined mask. China Machado was covering her bare breast with a one-of-a-kind Elsa black feather silver-handled fan. Pat Cleveland was rigged up to fly across the stage wearing a nude chiffon pleated dress. At Versailles, Halston and his fellow American designers propelled American fashion into the limelight and onto an international stage. Halston's modern approach stunned the French audience, who were impressed with the simplicity and pared-down elegance of his designs. By the end of the evening, it was clear who had won. Pat Shelton, then fashion editor of the Chicago Daily News, said, "The Americans wiped out the French. The Americans came on stage so clean and modern." Halston's first home was a strikingly modern Manhattan townhouse on East 63rd Street, designed by architect Paul Rudolph. The house was described in the New York Times as seamlessly marrying fashion, architecture, interior design and art, and came to symbolise the Halston idea of beauty. Halston's house is spare but totally luxurious. Standing inside it, one cannot help but think of Halston's own designs, since the ideas which underlie the architecture parallel the designer's own themes. Built between 1966 and 1967, the exterior was so understated that the casual passerby may not even notice its existence. Its only distinguishing feature on the exterior was the building number, 101. The sunken two-storey living room had a soaring 27-foot ceiling and glass-walled bamboo-filled greenhouse. Except to sleep and look at TV, I rarely use any other room but this. Its proportions are so interesting too, and it is here that I've discovered that modern is the only way to live. I like the simplification of living with only a few things. The decor was sleek, minimal and subdued. The colour scheme was white and grey, and the only decoration was Halston's favourite flower, orchids, and a rotating selection of Warhols. The house was to become a symbol of the Halston aesthetic, extreme yet seemingly effortless elegance, which was the way he preferred to live his life. In January 1978, Halston moved into his new office in the Olympic Tower skyscraper on 51st Street at 5th Avenue, next to St Patrick's Cathedral. The new office was clad in mirrored walls and floor-to-ceiling doors and windows filled with clean-lined furniture and sprays of orchids. Halston sat at his enormous red lacquered desk, languorously puffing on a cigarette. He was surrounded by spectacular views of the Manhattan skyline. The spires of St Patrick's Cathedral were so close you felt you could reach out and touch them. He was at his zenith. The first fashion show at Olympic Tower was the made-to-order collection for summer 1978, which was held in February. Perhaps inspired by his new surroundings, Halston told Women's Wear Daily that the collection looks different from anything else I've ever done. Flying saucer, big, full, round. It catches the air and moves beautifully. Halston designated the 52nd Street end of the floor as the press section, with cameras trained on the VIPs at the 51st Street end, with St Patrick's Cathedral as their backdrop. A setup that ensured all images of the show would be as spectacular as possible. Studio 54 was the most exclusive club in the city, which only allowed in the most glamorous, rich, beautiful and interesting people. Halston was very much part of the Studio 54 aristocracy, which included the designer alongside Bianca Jagger, Liza Minnelli, Steve Rubel, one of the owners of the club, and Andy Warhol. Back then, cocaine was the new drug of choice, and this style of clubbing was so new, liberating and chic. Cocaine offered a means to be free, to express yourself with greater ease, and to be able to keep up with the eternal nightlife. Along with many others, Halston embraced the trend of taking narcotics. Some people have asserted that Halston became an addict, others have staunchly denied it. Later, Halston would come to prefer the privacy of his townhouse. Often, Halston and Liza would come to the front of Studio 54, get snapped by the paparazzi, do a lap of the club, and then leave through a back door, back to 101.
Find a spot out on the floor.
In the spring of 1980, Halston was invited as a guest of the People's Republic of China to explore the Chinese silk industry. The 3-continent, 6-city tour was to last 24 days. Halston invited his Halstonettes along to model for him. He provided every piece of clothing for each model to wear for the entire trip. Karen Bjornsson said, "I just packed makeup and lingerie and everything else was supplied." Halston choreographed the first American fashion show ever to be staged in China for the Chinese fashion and textile manufacturers in Shanghai. Halston and his entourage even went on a tour of the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall was overwhelming. For the ride there, we were to wear the rain silkwear. Everyone was in the outfit assigned for that excursion. Being on one of the 7 wonders of the world was amazing, and the photo opportunities. Everyone clustered together, then everyone's camera would come out. By this point in his career, Halston was a bona fide celebrity. His reach was global. He appeared on talk shows, on magazine covers, in public relation campaigns, and even on an episode of The Love Boat. Many wondered, will Halston take over the world? Ultimately, it was the deal with Norton Simon that was the catalyst to the downfall of Halston Enterprises. Due to his phenomenal success, there was a lot of pressure to license his name. Norton Simon entered Halston into a deal to design clothing for the Penney retail company. It was the biggest project the designer had ever undertaken. The multi-million-dollar 6-year licensing deal would bring the company a yearly income of $5 million. This arrangement was the first of its kind and came long before the likes of H&M and Target would create red-hot designer collaborations. Beginning in the fall season of 1983, Halston was to design a line of women's wear exclusively for Penney, with children's and men's clothing to be added later. People were sceptical, but Halston had a dream about reaching Middle America with his designs. He wanted to dress and beautify the American public, to show the world America could be chic. It was a forward-thinking idea, but one the fashion elite were not willing to embrace. Bergdorf Goodman's, the store that had given him his start, were outraged and announced it would no longer be stocking Halston. Other stores and exclusive boutiques followed suit, including Ben Kahn, who had been making furs under license to Halston. Just weeks after the launch of the Penney line, Norton Simon was sold to Esmark for $925 million, who almost immediately were bought over by Beatrice Foods. Halston Enterprises became part of the International Playtex Inc. Halston had gone from working with people he trusted to being a tiny cog in a very large, very corporate machine. Halston Enterprises was becoming a small fish in an ever-expanding ocean of bigger brands. Halston's workload increased along with the pressure to make profits grow. Nothing was to be sold with his name on it if he did not actually design it. His desire for perfection in everything he did and his inability to delegate responsibility meant that it was difficult for him to meet deadlines for the many licensed products that bore his name. Mounting pressure to produce, along with Halston's suspected addiction to drugs, led to frequent eruptions of his notoriously violent temper. He raged almost daily, and members of his staff, from seamstresses to business managers, lived in fear of his wrath. The more the corporate bosses tried to exert control, the more Halston resisted. Something had to break. Halston, the man whose name the company was built upon, designed his last collection for his eponymous brand in the fall of 1984. After his expulsion from Olympic Tower, Halston could no longer create or sell clothes using his own name, and procedures were put in place to erase him from the business. The entire Halston archive, which should have eventually ended up in a museum, was offloaded. Every original Halston prototype, priceless gowns were sold off for less than the cost of the materials. Halston spent the next few years of his life with friends, travelling and fighting to buy back his company and name. He continued to create one-off gowns for his private and celebrity clientele, and also designed stage costumes for his dear friend Martha Graham's theatrical productions. In 1988, Halston was diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. In the last months of his life, Halston moved to Santa Rosa in California, just north of San Francisco, to be with his family. He bought a white Rolls Royce and rode the coast with his brother as his driver. Roy Halston Frowick died on the 26th of March 1990 at the age of 57. To the end, he maintained his dignity and humour, stating that he was grateful for the many wonderful things that life had bestowed upon him. Gee, I think about my life and I've just had a wonderful life. I was always a success. I always had the nicest friends. I always had everything I wanted. I've had a great life. Since his death, many American fashion designers have credited Halston as a major force in changing the fashion landscape and for directly inspiring their own work. Isaac Mizrahi said Halston did much to modernise women's clothing by understanding that women literally wanted to move and be in motion, and he made clothes accordingly. Donna Karan said Halston understood luxury, glamour, simplicity, fit. He represented all that was modern and pure. American fashion designer Tom Ford cited Halston as a major influence when he took over as creative director at Gucci and Saint Laurent in the late 1990s. Tom Ford's aesthetic owed much to the lean, clean-lined and sexy designs that Halston created during the era he dominated. Michael Halpern is a London-based, New York-born designer who created a kind of Halston-like nighttime glamour worn by women such as Adwoa Aboah and Marianne Cotillard. Halpern's mother wore Halston in the 1970s and he has long been a fan. He particularly admired the way Halston made elegance possible without restriction. He realised his customer is getting in and out of cars, she's doing meetings, she's picking up people, she's up and down from low chairs. It was about a modern woman at night and during the day. From 2007 to 2008, Halstonette Chris Royer developed the Hilco Halston archive of over 300 unique vintage Halston pieces, which included editorial articles and all background information in reference to Halston's designs. And some pieces were loaned to the 2014 travelling exhibition Halston and Warhol, Silver and Suede. Halston, alongside Yves Saint Laurent, was also the focus of a major exhibition at the museum at FIT in 2015, which explored how both designers epitomised 1970s style and glamour. Numerous attempts have been made to revive the brand, including Sarah Jessica Parker, who was enlisted as she wore two Halston heritage dresses in 2009. The label still exists, though it is fair to say it has lost its place on the high fashion radar. Halston has also been the subject of two feature-length documentaries, Ultra Suede, In Search of Halston, and Halston, a CNN film. Halston's legacy remains as strong as ever through Netflix and Ryan Murphy's new show Halston, based on the book Simply Halston by Stephen Gaines, reaffirming his position as the man who defined an era. The 1970s belonged to Halston. Roy Halston Frowick, known simply as Halston, was America's first fashion superstar and defined the glamour of the 1970s and dressed the decade's most influential and stylish women. Hailed as the premier fashion designer in America, Halston defined iconic American style. Devoid of superfluous trimmings, Halston reinvented the jumpsuit, the shirtdress and the classic caftan by mixing simple and minimalistic silhouettes with luxurious fabrics, epitomising the hedonistic glamour and excess of the 1970s. As a regular at Studio 54, Halston's designs were created to move and shimmer on the dance floor. Halston pioneered the idea of the designer as stylist. He created a world for you to live in, from caftans to couches. He promoted a unified aesthetic vision. America's first fashion superstar, a groundbreaking craftsman, a pioneering businessman, and a genius of promotion, as well as a compellingly glamorous man with handsome movie star looks. Fashion is made by fashionable people. Well, that's it for Fashion and Halston, America's first fashion superstar. I'll see you next time, but before you go, don't forget to subscribe to Fashion And, with me, Scott Schiavone, Fashion Curator.